Hi, my name is Cecil Walker,
And I'm Adam Frower.
and this is Possibilities. Today, we're going to be chatting about how to do something about procrastination, how to get rid of your procrastination. I guess to kick us off, what was helpful for our discussion of procrastination was, what do we even mean by procrastination? What is it?
True. Yes, I think that's an important place to start. Maybe we'll get into this nuance, but I guess if we just start with a plain definition, it means to postpone or to hesitate doing something. One of the synonyms that we talked about was like kicking the can down the road, putting something in front of something else.
And what stood out to me was the intention to do it. This is on your list of things to do. This, for whatever reason, is a thing that you have said, I'm going to do that thing.
Yes. I think that is important. I think one of the things that's important about that is we talked about, like, sometimes people say, I'm going to do this thing, but they actually have no intention of doing it. So now it's just, it's not that they're postponing doing it, they just committed to something that they actually have no intention of doing, and therefore they're not actually procrastinating. They just tried to appease you when they said, yes, I'll do that thing.
Yeah. So I think that being a separate thing means that this conversation here that we're talking about is when you are intending to do something, how do you get it done? How do you stop that tendency to keep kicking it down the road, to delay that thing, or to say I'm going to do easier or more enjoyable things well before I get to that other thing? I guess, yeah, you're the smart one. How do people do that? How do you stop yourself from giving in to I'll do it later?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I guess I would say at this point is this idea of procrastination, it also kind of like butts up against a conversation around like motivation. Like, how do you get motivated to do something? And so I think acknowledging that, but I think one of the things that I think is really essential and that we kind of came to as we were having this conversation, as we were kind of preparing for this and looking at various things, one of the things that I would say is it comes from the term that I'll use is integrity, right? So it comes from really honestly evaluating what do I value? Another way that I would say that, I guess, is what version of myself do I want to be? And I think when we talk about that, of like, okay, when we envision what's important to me, what kind of person do I want to be, then we make decisions based on that. So then we say, when I find, in some sense, what my purpose is, when I find what's valuable to me, then things that I choose to do are in line with that. And sometimes that means that those things get easier, or I like doing them and it's enjoyable, so I don't feel that temptation to like put it off. And so sometimes just being integritous with yourself means that you'll find things that fit with you, you'll make decisions that are in line with that, and some of procrastination will take care of itself because I'm no longer committing to doing things that are inconsistent with who I want to be. So I think that's part of it. But I think the other part of like kind of finding that version of you that you want to be means then that the purpose for why you're doing them also changes. And so now maybe now I'm eating in a way that I want to eat, not because I love those foods, but because it's consistent with the kind of person that I want to be. Maybe I start reading books I start learning new things that maybe I wasn't interested in before, or I didn't access before. But now I understand I want to become this kind of a person. And in order to become this kind of person, I need to know these things. I need to learn these things. So it shifts my behaviors, it shifts my patterns, because I know who I am. So I think that's one of the first steps, is like really being honest and saying, what kind of person do I want to be? And what does that mean about what kinds of things I should be doing and shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, not only is that such a consequential step to take in seeing yourself spending your time and doing the things that you want to see yourself doing, but I feel like it also allows you to be able to connect a genuine part of yourself to whatever the thing is that you're wanting to see yourself in, even if that feels like that's the task itself is like something that, you know, you're not the kind of person who does that thing. Like a lot of people could say, you know, I'm not the kind of person who could be vegan, or I'm not the kind of person who could write a book or run a marathon, or, you know, do any of these things that feel like they're very different than what I am doing or have been doing. But when you do that, when you look at what do I value, who's the kind of person that I want to be, what does the best version of me tend to do, I think you could take pieces of yourself and connect it to things inside of this. Maybe you're not the run of the marathon kind of person, but you could be the kind of person who wakes up and spends the time to, you know, go with a friend or something out for a run, and that adds up and adds up over time to now you found yourself running a marathon eventually.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I was actually running this morning, and part of how I run is that I watch an app, and there's a guy, and he's like, and one of the things that he said this morning just came back to me, is that he was saying, you know, I think sometimes we shoot for perfection.
Mm-hmm.
We aim for perfection, and we're trying to reach that thing. And he said, as I've lived my life, and he had gone through a really like significant illness and potentially was going to die, and he was just kind of like coming back from that process. And he said, as I've been overcoming that process, one of the things I realized is I actually can't be perfect, and I don't need to be perfect. So I've tried to now just figure out what's good enough. And I've realized that over a lifetime, if I deposit goodness each day, that builds up to something great. That at the end of my life, I can look back and I can say, look at the great things that I've been able to do or accomplish, or how I've been able to live my life. But it's not that I have to be great every single day. It's that I am good. I'm good enough each day. And that adds up, that cumulative factor becomes something really monumental.
Yeah. I think that image of perfection, or whatever the finish line is, the most ideal state of this thing, can sometimes be limiting in a way to have your focus completely enshrouded in that. Because then it starts to discount just the stuff you do along the way to getting there. We were kind of talking about how do both of us deal with procrastination and get ourselves to do the things that we want to do. And I think something that is really, really helpful for me is very similar to that. It's that everything counts. You know, if I spend 5 minutes on this thing, that feels like that counts as something. And I know that once I just get started on it too, a lot of it will just happen anyway. So I don't have a problem opening the door without saying for sure the whole thing is going to be done. So I know a lot is going to happen just from me engaging in that thing in the first place. So I think if you not only value the end product and the version of yourself that it takes to engage in this thing, but you also really, really value the steps along the way, or the little minute things it looks like that goes into that thing, I think you could see yourself actually really starting to fall into it and become the kind of person who does those kinds of things. I know I always use a lot of music analogies or whatever, but whenever growing up I would be working on like a really hard piece that I'm trying to learn on the piano, it's always more satisfying to play what you know than what you need to learn and what you need to practice, especially if it's like really difficult and takes a lot of concentration. But just by sitting down at the piano, some progress is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so just the thought of getting to the hard part was pushing me away from ever even sitting down. I would go nowhere. Nothing would ever happen. But even if I sat down and just found myself kind of interested in playing a little bit, it always ends up pushing me somewhere. Something is going to happen. And bit by bit, I'm going to ease my way into that harder part. Enough minutes go by to where it just feels less difficult in the first place. And so I think bringing ourselves to at least sit down at the thing can make a huge difference, even if it feels like, you know, that doesn't count for some reason, that's not substantial enough to really matter in the long run. But I think it actually counts for a lot of it.
Yeah, you actually reminded me, so when we were talking before, the way that we were kind of talking about it, which I think is useful language to have, is you're kind of creating an environment in which you can succeed. And I think you were just kind of hinting at that, of like, if you're trying to learn to play the piano, sitting at the piano, now you're in an environment where you're more likely to succeed than if you're sitting outside on a blanket, right? So it's like you put yourself in the environment, and then the natural consequence is, well, I'll just put my hands on this keyboard and something will come out. Maybe it's this song, maybe it's not, but it's more likely to be this song if you're sitting there than if you're sitting somewhere else. So I think that setting the environment is an important component. But I also think, as you were talking, part of creating that environment is also doing something. You said it's more fun to do something that you're good at than something that you need to learn. And I think pairing those things, right, can be part of the environment of, okay, I'm going, and sometimes I think that I get to do this thing that I like first, and then I'll do this thing that I don't like so much second. And so I'll use kind of the energy that I stored up from this, and I'll push myself to do that. And I think sometimes it's the other way around. I think one of the things that sometimes works for me is like chunking it, right? Saying, okay, I'll do this much, and then I'll get to do blank. So sometimes people talk about it as like a reward, but I also think about it as like, again, kind of setting that environment of pairing, I just accomplished something, and so now I can do something that I enjoy. And that'll give me then kind of that cyclical energy of like, then I have enough energy again to go back to something that's difficult or hard. So I think sometimes pairing things can make it part of that environment of like, now I'm more likely to succeed because I'm simultaneously building energy that I like and then using that energy to accomplish something difficult.
Yeah, that starts to kind of push into something else that I was thinking about, that makes accomplishing whatever it is that you want to accomplish a little bit more doable. And I mean, you were kind of describing creating the context that makes that thing more doable. And I would say even on top of that, also finding what's drawing you to that in the first place. Even if I feel like there's this really hard thing on piano that I don't really, when I think about it, really feel like sitting down and working on that really hard thing. But I know I love music, and I know I love piano, and I love playing it, and I enjoy it, and this is, something that I spend a lot of time on in general. And so leaning into whatever it is that's really drawing you to it in the first place. I don't particularly love hard workouts, but it does feel really nice to do good things for my body and for my health, and things that feel like I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing something healthy, I'm making good choices. That aspect of it feels really, really nice. The same way making healthy choices in food or whatever it is. And so I could be pushed away by the hard part of it, or the part that I don't like, or the part that really makes me say, I'll do that later, I'll get to that some other time. But there's definitely parts to it that say, I want to do this right now. I want to make that good choice right now. I want to feel as good as this makes me feel right now. And so I think finding those little diamonds within that thing, exposing them and really, really making that kind of at the center of what you're doing can help make the procrastination feel less necessary. You'll want to get to it even more.
I think one of the other things that is kind of connected to that, maybe it's part of creating the environment, but maybe it's something tangential to that, which is, I think, holding yourself accountable in some way, right? I think oftentimes it's easy to push it down the road if I feel like, well, I can get away with that.
Yeah.
I can get away with pushing it down the road. And so maybe that's like, I set a certain deadline and I know that I'm not going to go past it. Or maybe I talk to somebody who's meaningful to me and I say, can you help me with this? One of the things that I was thinking about, again, like, if you've watched more than one of these, you know that I don't really like to run, although I run really regularly. And one of the things that I hadn't really realized that helps me to run is that I have a daughter, and I wake her up in the morning to get ready for school, and then while she's eating breakfast and doing those things, then I run. And then she knows once she finishes eating breakfast, she goes and practices the piano. So I know, like, while I'm running, I'm going to start hearing the piano playing, right? And every once in a while I'll have like an early morning meeting or something that throws off that schedule a bit, or I know that I have to go do some other kind of workout, so I say I'm going to postpone the run because I'm going to do something else later. And she knows the routine enough that she will say to me, are you going to work out today? And that routine, building it into, it's not something I enjoy and I could easily postpone or procrastinate doing that, but she doesn't know that I have that option. She inquires, and so now when I explain why I'm not running, it's because I'm explaining the exception rather than, now what are you doing today? And so I think creating an environment, maybe that it's habitual, maybe that it's routine, maybe that other people are aware that it's happening, so they're going to inquire. All of those things kind of hold us accountable. If the routine gets off, what do I fill that time with if I push that out of the routine? So I think that's one of the things that helps with procrastination is build it in. And I think I'll say one more thing about that. I guess one of the other things I think is to make it meaningful, right? That the running, she knows that I run, and so we've had lots of conversations around like, why do you do this thing? And so the reason that I run is not because I love to run, but the reason that I run is because she's meaningful to me. And so she inquires because she knows now you're doing this because you want to be healthy and you want to be able to do things with me and you want to, right? And so it's meaningful enough to her that she wants me to do it. And I think adding meaning to the routine, it's not just routine for routine's sake, but it's routine that's mixed with meaning.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most powerful things that can hold any of us to a certain standard is having people around you and all of this interaction kind of embedded with meaning, but having people around you holding you to a certain version of yourself, a really capable version of yourself to say, no, I know your norm actually is this is who you are, this is what you've committed to, this is what you're capable of. And so if there's a day that feels like you're beneath that, it's an eyebrow raiser. It's why are you being beneath what I know you're supposed to be and who you actually are?
Right, and you definitely don't want to let a 12-year-old down.
Definitely not yours, too. She'll let you have it. That kind of brings me to a last thing that I was kind of thinking about, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on them. How much of this is rooted in a bit of a mindset, in a bit of seeing yourself differently? Because I know a lot of people would describe this procrastination version of themselves as the default version of themselves, as I always fall back to not doing the things that I really want to do, as wasting my time doing something else, or just being lazy, or not, it's my New Year's resolutions exist somewhere in January, and the rest of the year I'm always being this other kind of version of myself, which I think they consider to be the default version of themselves. But how much of a difference do you think some kind of flipping that would make, to say, I am this kind of version of myself who can do all these things, can work on all these things, can accomplish all these things, and sometimes I dip beneath that capability. Sometimes I forget that I'm capable of those things, or I forget how easily I can get that stuff done. What's the impact of that, and how do you make the flip happen, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think kind of what's embedded in your question is this idea of change, right? Is change possible? Because I think the reality is we all can be in a place where the default is I procrastinate, where I put off these things. I know that I should be this kind of person, but I'm not being that kind of person. And so I think in some sense you're saying, so how do I change? And I think one of the things that's important in that is it's not actually like I need to go out and develop this thing that I don't have, right? The skills that are required to become what we want to become, we've got them. The discipline that we need, it's possible, right? Each person has the skills of, like, unless there's a disability or something like that, if I want to write a book, like you mentioned before, the capacity to write a book is in there. the process might be different for each of us. Maybe, one person writes 1 page a day, and maybe another person writes, 100 pages in a week and then sets it aside for a minute. So the process might be different, but it's not like I go out and I have to become a different person in order to do this task. If I want to become a marathon runner, it's not like the only thing I have to do is start to run, practice running. I don't have to become a runner. Because I'm a person, I know how to run. And so I think part of it is seeing ourselves differently. Instead of saying, I'm not a runner or I'm not a book writer, you start saying, I have the ability to do that. Maybe I'm not using that ability right now, but I could. And so I think that you're right, it is a bit of a mindset. It's a different way of viewing it. But I think it comes back to meaning making. Why do you want to be a book writer? Why do you want to be a marathon runner? I think when you add meaning to it, now you're doing it not just to check the box, right? Not just to say, here's the book I wrote, or here's the medal I got because I finished the marathon. You're doing it for a bigger purpose. You're doing it because you are this kind of a person. You're a person who follows through with their commitments. You're a person who is dedicated. You're a person who can overcome obstacles, whatever it is. And so I think part of how do you make that change? You have to really sit down. I think it comes back to that integrity bit a bit, right? You have to sit down and say, this is the kind of person I want to be. This is what it would mean to me if I got to be that kind of a person. This is how I would feel if I could accomplish these things that would let me know I'm reaching my potential. And so I think part of it is again, you have to have the vision of why you're doing these difficult things, and then doing them becomes more manageable, more doable. Not because I'm a different person, but because the meaning of why I'm doing this has changed.
I think all of that speaks to what we see as solution-focused therapists as valuable in exploring the future. Of course, that meaning-making part that you were talking about, that there is meaning behind the change that you want, and tapping into that and seeing that and filling yourself with that and using that makes change happen inherently. But also in exploring the future that you're looking for, to place yourself there, even if just conversationally and hypothetically, means that there are lines connecting who you are now to that place and who you were before even to that place. And there's so much you can do to explore. Well, then what must be there? Who must I be? What must I have? What must have happened? How can these realities be connected in this kind of a way? And I think exploring that allows you to be able to say, well, yes, stuff must have been in me. I must have been this kind of a person all along. It must be there. It's not that I'm conjuring this out of anywhere, or that I'm suddenly trying to rebuild who I am. It's just putting to use what is there already. It's you being who you are, but maybe you're being that in a more purposeful way. Maybe you're being that in a more diligent way.
Yeah, I think one other thing, I guess, that I would talk about, that would help to overcome procrastination is, I don't know how to say it except for planning the celebration, right? It could be from a really minute task where you're like, if I accomplish this task, I'm going to celebrate. I love ice cream, so with a bowl of ice cream, right? But at the end of a degree, we have a celebration of a graduation. When we finish a job, we have a retirement party. So we mark the ending of something, the accomplishment of something, oftentimes with a celebration. And I think sometimes when we procrastinate, we're focused on the difficulty of the task. We're focused on the difficulty of even getting started. But if we plan the celebration, it becomes something to look forward to. It becomes something that is, again, a meaning making of, if I can become this kind of a person, I deserve to celebrate. I deserve to acknowledge, I have transformed into this person that I've wanted to become.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person who accomplishes what they set out to accomplish. And so I think the more again, kind of putting it into the future, like you mentioned, the more specific I can be, the more detailed I can be of like, what's the celebration going to be like? What are we going to do? Who's going to be there? What would it mean to them? What would it mean to me if I saw all these people who could celebrate my success with me? I think all of those things can help us to be motivated to say, I really want that celebration.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to postpone when I get that celebration.
Yeah, I think there was just this inherent social component to the celebration that you were describing. And I don't think it always has to be that way, but I think some of the most meaningful celebrations are that way. And I think it brings it back to in sharing that accomplishment with the people who are meaningful to you, and bringing it back to the places of accountability, and bringing it back to here's where this is relevant. It starts to heighten, I guess, the sense of the prize that's in what you're looking at. I never really stopped to think about it, but I think about the enjoyment of the end most times when I'm having to do something really difficult. I think I mentally walk through, I'm going to be in this place eventually, and it'll feel nice to have this done, and to think this, and to have this freedom, and to all those kinds of things.
Okay, I know that I said that was the last thing, but I remembered one other thing that we had talked about before, which I think is really important, so I want to make sure that we throw it out there. And it was this idea that we started talking about that we called like micro commitments.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important thing, that one of the things that helps, as we talked about, like when we're trying to accomplish something difficult, one of the things that we found ourselves saying, well, how do we do it?
Yeah.
It was you kind of think through and you say, okay, I'm going to do this thing tomorrow morning between 8 and 10, right? The more specific that you can be and say, I commit to 8 to 10, then that makes it much more doable, because tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I have the memory of making that commitment in my mind. And then I have to make the decision, am I going to follow through with that commitment or not? If I just say, at some point this week, I'm going to do it, then that moment of decision making doesn't really ever have to arise. So the more of those micro commitments, in some sense, it's the same thing with planning the celebration. It's planning the accomplishment.
Right.
The more things that I can micro commit to, a certain time, a certain place, doing it with a certain person, doing it in a certain way, wearing certain clothes while I'm doing this thing, right? The more I can concretely kind of commit to all of these details, then any time I encounter, I look at what I'm going to wear that day. Well, I thought about, I need to wear this in order to accomplish this thing. If I'm eating breakfast at 8 o'clock, I think, should I be eating breakfast right now, or should I be doing that thing? So now I'm constantly confronted with decisions where I have to recommit, or I have to say, yes, I'm going to follow through with that commitment. The more of those micro commitments we can establish up front, the more likely it's going to be that I'm going to follow through and not push it down the road.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did mention that, because I do think that is a really helpful thing to understand and notice in trying to lessen your procrastination. Because to me, it sounds like a merging of the possibilities of who you could be and what you could get done with your actual reality. You're starting to say, well, if this was going to be my real reality, it could fit in here. It could happen right here in this way, and look like this and be like this. And celebration as well. I could have this at the end of that process too.
Yeah.
Well, I hope people take this to heart and really start to use this, because it's coming from the expert on how to be diligent and how to hold yourself.
When he said expert, I think he meant himself.
No, you're literally the most diligent person that I think I know. So all of these things I think could really help someone start to, I think most importantly, see themselves differently, see themselves as capable of pushing that procrastination out of the way, procrastinate on the procrastination, and see yourself kind of build into being who you want to be, doing what you want to do.
Yeah, perfect. Well, if you enjoyed this, or if we have stirred thoughts in you, please leave a comment. If you think that there are people in your lives that could benefit from this content, please share it with them. Like it, and again, share broadly. We want to be able to, one of the reasons that we do this is that we want to be able to help as many people as possible. And that's really only possible if you let others that you know who would benefit from this enjoy it as well. So let us know what you think. If you have topics that you would like us to cover in this process, let us know that too, and we'll try to take those on as well. But until next time, thanks for being here.